The vote was already in progress when I walked into the chamber. I could hear it through the corridor walls, that low, harmonic rumble the Velthan make when they are counting in unison. It sounds like a cathedral organ played underwater. The sound vibrated in my chest. I had 11 seconds to reach my seat before the tally locked. I ran. My name is Yusuf Adeyemi. I am 47 years old, born in Lagos, raised in Edinburgh, and on this particular morning, I was the most important human being alive, not because I was the smartest or the bravest, but because I was the only one in the room. The Grand Council Chamber of the Galactic Federation is a sphere, not a dome, not an amphitheater, but a perfect sphere, with delegate platforms arranged in concentric rings that curve both below and above the central podium. When you stand at the center, you are surrounded on all sides by hundreds of alien faces. The first time I entered this room, 9 years ago as a junior diplomatic observer, I was so overwhelmed I had to grip the railing to stay upright. Today I gripped nothing. I sat down, pressed my palm to the identification plate, and watched the tally numbers roll. Earth's ratification into full Federation membership passed with 39 votes in favor, 0 against, and 2 abstentions. The 2 abstentions were from the door, which surprised no one, because the door had been deliberating over whether to eat breakfast for the past 6 weeks, and had not quite finished. The chamber produced a sound I had no word for. It was celebration, filtered through 40 different species' idea of what celebration meant. The Velthan harmonics shifted into something bright and resonant. The Reth delegates shimmered, their bioluminescent membranes cycling through colors too fast for my eyes to name. A cluster of Perrin delegates in the upper rings clattered their secondary limbs together in what their cultural liaison had told me was the equivalent of applause. I sat very still and breathed. 11 years. That was how long Earth had been a provisional member, orbiting the full membership the way a planet orbits a star, close enough to feel the warmth, never quite allowed to land. 11 years of observation, negotiation, compromise, and patience. 11 years of humans watching how the Federation worked, learning its rhythms, studying its history, memorizing its failures as carefully as its achievements. My predecessor, Ambassador Constance Hartley, had spent the last 4 of those years building the coalition that made today possible. She had retired 6 months ago. She sent me a handwritten note this morning, on actual paper, which she had somehow managed to transport 6 light years through 3 separate cargo transfers. It said, "Remember what we talked about. Do not let them surprise you. You will be tempted to feel grateful. Stay clear." I kept the note in my jacket pocket. I touched it now, through the fabric. Grand Arbiter Soresh descended from the elevated Velthan platform. The Velthan are tall, 7 feet at minimum, with 4 upper limbs and a posture that makes humans feel like they are perpetually slouching. Soresh was older than most, his resonance membranes the pale silver of someone who had been in this chamber for decades. He moved with the calm of someone who had never once been surprised by anything. He reached the central podium and the chamber quieted. He welcomed Earth. He said the appropriate things. His translator rendered his speech into English in my earpiece, with only the faint delay that always reminded me I was very far from home. He spoke of the long tradition of the Federation, of the shared purpose that united species across impossible distances, of the collective strength that came from cooperation. He said the word cooperation 4 times in 7 sentences. I counted. Then he paused. The pause lasted slightly too long. I felt it before I understood it. A small tightening in my jaw. A shift in my posture that was purely instinctive. The way a person steps back slightly when something changes in a room without knowing yet what changed. Soresh said that in celebration of Earth's full membership, the Council looked forward to Earth's contribution to the shared technology commons. As was tradition, he said, as every species had contributed upon ratification. As was expected. He smiled. The Velthan smile with their lower membranes. It is a gracious expression. I had spent a long time learning to read it. He was not asking. He was announcing. The chamber produced a small, warm sound of approval. Dozens of species nodding in their own particular ways. This was normal to them. This was so normal that it had not occurred to a single delegate in this room that it might not happen. I looked at Soresh. He looked at me. His expression was patient, and warm, and entirely certain. I smiled back. I had practiced this smile in a mirror for approximately 6 months. It was the smile of a man who had heard you perfectly and was choosing, very deliberately, not to answer. The session ended with a reception in the adjoining hall. Delegates from a dozen species came to offer congratulations. I shook hands, bowed, performed the appropriate gestures for species that did not shake hands, and said the appropriate things. I ate something that resembled a small blue fruit and tasted like salted copper and tried not to make a face. Oliver Grant, my deputy attaché, appeared at my elbow just before the hour mark. Oliver was 29, from Bristol, and had the specific energy of someone who had been trying not to say something urgent for the past 40 minutes. "The Commons paperwork," he said quietly. "They've already had the filing templates sent to our office." "I know. They're assuming 30 standard days." "I know. Yusuf." He dropped the title, which he only did when he was genuinely concerned. "Did you speak to Hartley this morning?" "She wrote to me." "What did she say?" I touched my jacket pocket. "She said to stay clear." Oliver looked at me for a long moment. He was a careful young man, precise and cautious, which was why I had chosen him. He could tell when something large was moving beneath a surface, and he was wise enough to wait for it to surface on its own. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "Tonight," I said. "I am going to call my daughter and tell her that humanity is officially a full member of the Galactic Federation." "And tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," I said, "I am going to send 2 words to the Prime Minister's office." Oliver waited. "They asked," I said. He understood immediately. His face did something complicated. Not fear exactly, but the near relative of fear, the thing that lives next door to it and borrows its expression. "Right," he said quietly. He straightened his jacket. "Right." We stayed at the reception for another 20 minutes, making conversation and being agreeable. I spoke with a Reth cultural delegate named something that translated approximately as flowing current through deep stone, who preferred to be called Current for short. Current was warm and curious, and asked me what Earth's oceans smelled like. I told her, and she went very still in the way that meant she was processing an emotion. I walked back through the curved corridors of the station to my quarters. The station orbited a gas giant the Federation called Sorel Mahan, which meant roughly the patient one in the oldest Velthan dialect. The gas giant was a deep burnt orange streaked with white, enormous and serene outside my viewport. I sat on the edge of my bed and made the call home. My daughter Amara answered on the 3rd ring. She was 22 and studying in Cape Town, and she had her mother's habit of answering the phone as if she had been expecting the call but not the caller. "Dad," she said, "is it done?" "It's done," I said. "Full membership." She made a sound that was equal parts joy and relief, and I heard her tell someone in the background, and I heard a distant cheer that was probably her housemates. For a moment I sat in that sound and let myself feel it, the full weight of what today meant, not politically, not strategically, but simply as a fact. Humans were members of a 3,000-year-old galactic civilization. My daughter would grow up in a universe with acknowledged neighbors. Then I let the feeling go, the way Hartley had taught me to let things go when there was still work to do. "There's going to be a difficult few months," I told Amara. She was quiet for a moment. She was sharp, my daughter. She had grown up watching me navigate things, and she had learned to read the space between what I said and what I meant. "How difficult?" she asked. "Interesting," I said. She was quiet again. Then, "You're going to do the thing, aren't you?" "What thing?" I said. "Dad, get some sleep," I said. "I love you." I ended the call and sat in the dark for a while, looking at the patient gas giant outside my window, orange and enormous, and entirely unconcerned with anything happening aboard the small station in its orbit. 30 standard days, they assumed. In 30 standard days, they were going to learn something about humans that 3,000 years of Federation tradition had never prepared them for. We are, at our core, a species that has nearly destroyed itself more times than we can count. We have come to the edge of our own extinction through pride and carelessness, and short-sightedness and greed. We have burned things we could not rebuild. We have lost things we could never replace. And what that history made us, the specific, strange thing it pressed us into, was not humble. It was not obedient. It was not grateful. It made us careful. It made us extremely, exhaustingly, stubbornly careful. I turned out the light and went to sleep, and 30 standard days began. The empty chair was the first thing Suresh noticed when the emergency session opened. Not my chair. I was in my chair. It was the chair to my left, where the filing confirmation document should have been sitting, printed and signed, and ready to be collected by the Commons Registrar. Every ratified species in Federation history had placed that document in that chair on this day. The chair had held a document so many times that there was a slight indentation in the surface where the corner of a standard filing folder would rest. The chair was empty. The surface was smooth. Grand Arbiter Suresh stood at the central podium and looked at the chair with an expression his species used for something that had no direct English translation. The closest approximation was something like encountering a door in a wall that has no doors. The Galactic Federation's emergency sessions are not, despite the name, particularly fast. There are protocols. There are procedural announcements. There is a period of formal recognition during which each species representative confirms their presence and authority. This took 23 minutes. I sat through all of it with my hands folded on the desk in front of me, and my face in the expression I had also practiced, which was the expression of a man who is perfectly comfortable and has nowhere else he would rather be. Oliver sat 2 rows behind me in the observer section. I did not look at him. I did not need to. Suresh called the session to order and stated its purpose without any preliminary courtesies. The Commons filing for Earth's technology contribution was now 42 days overdue. The petition of cooperative obligation had been filed 18 days ago, and Earth had not responded. The Council was assembled to receive Earth's response and confirm a filing timeline. He looked at me. I stood. Grand Arbiter, I said, thank you for convening this session. Earth has received the petition of cooperative obligation and has considered it carefully. Suresh inclined his head. Earth respectfully declines to accept the petition, I said. The chamber did not erupt. That is the thing I remember most clearly. It did not shout or argue, or produce some dramatic alien sound. It went quiet in the way that very large spaces go quiet when something structurally important has changed, when the sound itself is uncertain what it is supposed to do next. I kept going. Earth is grateful for full membership in the Federation and takes its responsibilities as a member species seriously. Earth also takes seriously its responsibilities to its own people and to the technology that represents the work of generations of human scientists, engineers, and thinkers. At this time, Earth is not prepared to contribute the resonance fold drive or its derivative technologies to the shared technology commons. At this time, I watched the phrase land. I watched Suresh process it. His secondary membranes tightened slightly. He was intelligent enough to hear the architecture of those 3 words. Ambassador Adeyemi, he said, and his translator rendered his voice with the particular careful tone of someone choosing each word the way you choose steps across uncertain ground. Is there a translation difficulty? The petition of cooperative obligation is not a request. It is a legal instrument under Article 17 of the Federation Charter. No member species has declined it. I understand that, I said. Earth is aware of the legal instrument and its history. Our position is unchanged. The quiet broke. Not into shouting, but into something that was the alien equivalent of shouting. A dozen overlapping harmonic expressions, the shimmer of distressed Reth membranes in the upper rings, the rapid secondary limb clicking of the Perrin delegates that their cultural liaison had once told me signified deep unease. A delegate from the Marin, a species I had always found icily precise, rose without waiting to be recognized. This is without precedent, she said. Her translator gave her voice a clipped, metallic quality. The Commons has operated for 3,000 years on the principle of shared contribution. To refuse is to undermine the foundational agreement that makes the Federation possible. Earth has not refused to participate in the Commons, I said. Earth has declined to contribute one specific technology at this time. We remain committed to the Federation and to our obligations as a member species. This is not a rejection of the Commons. It is a question of readiness. Readiness. The Marin delegate's translator struggled with the disbelief. The technology functions. It has been in operation for 4 decades. What readiness remains? Our readiness, I said simply. Not the technologies. Another voice. A Velthan elder from the upper rings, a member of the long-duration governance committee. He was very old, his membranes nearly white. He had been in this chamber longer than Earth had been a provisional member. Ambassador, I must be direct. There is concern that Earth's position constitutes a breach of good faith. The Federation welcomed your species on the understanding that membership is a bilateral arrangement. What you are describing sounds like receiving the benefits of membership while declining its obligations. This was the sharpest argument. I had prepared for it. The Federation's obligations to Earth also include respect for Earth's sovereignty, I said. Membership does not require a species to surrender its most significant asset on demand. The cooperative obligation tradition is a tradition, not a constitutional requirement. I would ask the Council to consider carefully whether a tradition has the same legal force as a ratified charter article, because Earth's legal scholars have considered it, and our reading differs. The chamber went quiet again, a different quiet this time. The quiet of people realizing that the person they thought was confused had in fact been reading the same documents they had and had reached a different conclusion. Suresh was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his tone had changed subtly. The warmth was still there, but something beneath it had become more focused. Ambassador, he said, is there a specific concern that Earth has about the Commons that the Council could address? Is there something we have failed to explain or to offer that would resolve this? He was being reasonable. He was being genuinely, carefully reasonable, and that was, in its way, harder to stand against than the Marin delegate's sharpness. Grand Arbiter, I said, Earth does have specific concerns. However, we do not believe this session is the right forum to address them in depth. We would welcome a structured dialogue. We have prepared a document that outlines the conditions under which Earth would be prepared to revisit this question. Conditions, the Marin delegate said. The translator kept the word flat, but could not quite keep the weight out of it. Conditions, I confirmed. You are the newest member of this body, the Velthan elder said, not unkindly but very firmly. You have been a full member for 42 days. You are asking the Federation, which has existed for 3,000 years, to meet conditions you have written. Yes, I said, I am. The session went on for another 3 hours. I answered every question. I stayed calm through every challenge. I did not raise my voice. I did not apologize. I did not hedge. When I did not wish to answer something directly, I said so, and explained why, which is different from evasion. Evasion pretends. I was being transparent about exactly what I was and was not prepared to share. Near the end, Suresh called a recess. During the break, Oliver appeared at my side. You all right? He said. Fine, I said. The Perrin contingent is very upset. Their senior delegate was clicking continuously for about 40 minutes. I know, I counted. What does continuous clicking mean? Somewhere between acute distress and the early stages of a headache, I said. I think. The cultural notes were not fully precise on that point. Oliver was quiet for a moment. The Reth delegate, current. She hasn't shimmered once since your opening statement. I looked toward the Reth section. He was right. Current sat perfectly still. Her membranes settled to a neutral gray-blue. She was watching me with the large, dark eyes her species used for deep focus. She's thinking, I said. About what? That's the question, I said. When the session resumed, Suresh made a closing statement. He said the Council would review Earth's position, and the document Earth had submitted. He said the Council expected a resolution. He said the Federation's traditions had served its members well for 3 millennia, and that it was his sincere hope that Earth would come to appreciate what those traditions had built. It was measured, and it was dignified, and it was, underneath the surface, a very clear message. The Federation was patient, but it was not without limits. I thanked the Council for their time. I gathered my materials. I walked out of the chamber with Oliver 2 steps behind me, down the curved corridor, past the viewport where Sorel Mahan hung enormous and orange, and into the lift that would take us to the human diplomatic section. The lift doors closed. Oliver exhaled for what sounded like the first time in 3 hours. Yusuf, he said, they are going to come back at us hard. Yes, I said. We're going to lose trade pressure on the rare mineral contracts within 2 weeks. I've already seen the signals. Yes. The Marin delegate is going to file a secondary legal challenge. Her team was already drafting language when I walked past their alcove. Let her file it. Oliver looked at me. You're not worried? I thought about that honestly. The lift rose in silence. Outside, through the small viewport at the lift's rear, the stars moved slowly as the station turned. I'm concerned, I said. That's different from worried. Worried is when you don't know what's coming. Concerned is when you know exactly what's coming, and you've prepared for it, and you're still not certain you've prepared enough. The lift opened. We stepped out into the corridor that smelled, faintly and specifically, of the particular air recyclers the human section used, calibrated to produce something like the air of an open room at 22 degrees. It smelled like home, barely, but enough. What do we do now? Oliver asked. Now, I said, we wait for them to do what large institutions always do when they are surprised, which is pressure, I said, then confusion, and somewhere in the confusion, if we are patient, something honest. He nodded slowly. He was learning. He was learning the right things, which was what I needed him to do, because the next part of this was going to require every person on the human diplomatic team to understand not just what we were doing, but why, deep enough that they could hold to it when it became difficult. And it was going to become difficult. That was not pessimism, that was arithmetic. I went to my desk and opened a channel to the Prime Minister's office on Earth. The reply came in 7 minutes, faster than the light delay should have allowed, which meant the relay satellites were fully active, and someone on Earth had been sitting by a screen waiting. 2 words came back. Understood. Continue. I closed the channel and started reading the document that Earth's legal team had spent 4 years preparing. Not because I needed to review it again. I had memorized every paragraph. I read it because reading it reminded me of all the work, all the people, all the years of careful thinking that stood behind the position I had just defended in that chamber. It helped. It always helped to remember that you are not alone in a fight, even when you are the only one in the room. The Marin delegate's legal challenge arrived in 9 days. I had expected 14. She was faster than her reputation. Her name was Delegate Vale, and she had been a member of the Federation Council for 62 standard years, which for her species put her somewhere in what humans would call early middle age. She was precise and she was sharp, and she had, according to the Federation's internal records, never lost a legal challenge in 6 decades. Oliver had pulled her history the day after the emergency session and presented it to me over breakfast with the expression of someone delivering a medical diagnosis. I told him to compile her 10 most significant victories and identify what they had in common. He came back the next morning. She wins on technicalities, he said, not on principle. She finds the procedural gap and she drives through it. And good, I said. That's good? It means she's looking for the technical flaw in our position, I said, which means she has not yet decided to look at whether our position is correct. The challenge itself was dense and precise. It argued that the petition of cooperative obligation, while not explicitly a charter article, derived its legal force from Article 44, the Cooperation Clause, and that Earth's refusal therefore did constitute a breach of its ratification agreement. It cited 63 precedents. Every one of those precedents was a case where a member species had complied. It cited not a single case where a species had refused, because no such case existed. I read the document twice and then called a meeting of the full human diplomatic team. There were 11 of us. We sat around the table in the conference room that had a small photograph of Earth pinned above the door, a tradition that Hartley had started and that I had continued. I put Vale's challenge on the screen and walked through it paragraph by paragraph. Nora Webb, our legal specialist, had been reading it since before the meeting started. She was 41, originally from Manchester, and she had the habit of chewing the end of her stylus when she was focused. She had been chewing since we sat down. She's right about Article 44, Nora said. As a reading of the text, her interpretation is defensible. It's not the only interpretation, but it holds. What's our counter? I asked. Article 44 requires cooperation in good faith, Nora said. It does not specify the content of that cooperation. We argue that Earth is cooperating in good faith on every other dimension of membership. The Commons' contribution is not explicitly listed in the cooperation clause. The petition derives its force from tradition, not statute. Tradition is not law. Can we win that argument? Said Patrick Cole, our senior policy advisor. Patrick was from Cork and had been in Federation work for 15 years. He was not optimistic by nature, which made his optimism, when it appeared, worth paying close attention to. In front of the arbitration panel, Nora said, it depends on who sits on the panel. If the Velthan hold a majority, no. They wrote most of the Commons procedures. If the Reth and the smaller species hold the balance, possibly. How do we influence the panel composition? Patrick asked. We don't, I said. That would confirm every suspicion they have about us right now. We make our argument on the merits, we make it clearly, and we let it stand. The silence around the table was the silence of people who were not certain that was enough. There's something else, said Clara Moss, our cultural liaison specialist. Clara was 26, and one of the two people on the team I would describe as genuinely gifted. She had grown up in a multilingual household and had an instinct for the things people were not saying. The pressure campaign. She did not need to elaborate. Everyone in the room already knew. The rare mineral contracts had slowed, exactly as Oliver had predicted. 3 trade transit permissions for Earth vessels had been delayed without explanation. 2 species that had been reliably friendly had canceled scheduled dialogue sessions, also without explanation. Nothing that could be called a direct action. Nothing that could be formally protested. Just friction, applied steadily. How far does it go? Oliver asked. As far as they think they need to go, I said. They believe this is a misunderstanding. They believe we are uncertain or confused, or perhaps that Earth's government is divided, and we are waiting for an internal resolution. They are applying just enough pressure to help us make up our minds. And when they realize we're not going to make up our minds, Clara said, then it changes, I said. It becomes something harder. That is when we will need to be most careful. 2 weeks later, it changed. The rare mineral slowdown became a full administrative hold, classified under an obscure Federation trade clause relating to new members in their first standard year. The classification was technically legal, and also transparently tactical. Earth's supply of certain isotopes used in secondary drive calibration was not critical. We had reserves, but the message was clear. Simultaneously, the Perrin Cooperative, which controlled 14 key relay stations along the most efficient route between Federation space and Earth's home system, announced a scheduled maintenance period of indefinite duration. Again, technically legal. The Perrin were apologetic and warm about it. That made it worse. Patrick came to my office on the evening of the day the Perrin announcement came through. He sat down across from me and said nothing for a moment. How are you holding? He asked finally. I'm holding, I said. Back home, the Prime Minister's office has sent 3 queries in the past week. I've answered all 3. They're asking whether we've considered a partial disclosure, something symbolic, just enough to release the pressure. I had been expecting this. Hartley had told me it would come, not from the Federation but from our own side. The weight of sustained pressure has a specific effect on institutions. They begin to look for the path of least resistance. It is not weakness, it is physics. Tell them what I told them in the second query, I said. If we give them something symbolic, we have established that sustained pressure produces concessions. We will face sustained pressure for every significant decision we make for the next century. Patrick rubbed his jaw. I agree with you, he said. I want to be clear that I agree with you completely. I also need you to understand that the political environment at home is getting complicated. There's a motion being discussed in the Assembly. I looked at him. It won't pass, he said quickly. It won't, but the fact that it's being discussed is a signal. I stood up and went to the viewport. Sorel Mahan was in its crescent phase, a great curved arc of burnt orange against the black. Patrick, I said, do you know why Hartley chose me for this post? He waited. She told me it was because I was the only candidate who she believed would not be surprised by how lonely it got, I said. She said the key quality for this position was not intelligence or knowledge or diplomatic skill, though all of those matter. The key quality was the ability to remain steady when everyone around you, on both sides, was looking for a reason to stop. Patrick was quiet for a moment. "She's a wise woman," he said. "She's terrifying is what she is," I said. "Go get some sleep. Tomorrow the arbitration panel composition gets announced, and the day after that Vale files her secondary brief, and we will need everyone sharp." He left. I stayed at the viewport a while longer. Then something I did not expect arrived. A message to my personal channel, not the official diplomatic frequency. The sender identification was a Reth communication signature, and the message was short. It said, "Ambassador Adeyemi, I am current. You spoke to me at the ratification reception about your oceans. I am not authorized to speak to you on behalf of my delegation. I am speaking as an individual who is curious. I would like to meet privately, if you are willing. I understand if you are not." I read the message twice. I thought about Hartley's note. Stay clear. Stay clear did not mean do not speak to people. It meant, know what you are doing when you do. I replied, I am willing. Suggest a time and place. We met the following evening in one of the small observation lounges on the station's outer ring, the kind of room with a wide viewport and minimal furniture, and the specific quality of privacy that only exists in places no one considers important enough to monitor. Current arrived exactly on time. Her membranes were settled to the calm gray-blue of deep focus. She said, "I want to ask you something directly." "Please do," I said. "Are you afraid of us?" I sat with that question. It deserved a genuine answer, not a diplomatic one. "Not afraid," I said. "Cautious. We have been watching the Federation for 11 years from the inside, and for decades more from a distance, and what we have seen is complex. There are things we admire enormously. There are things that concern us. Fear and caution are not the same thing." She was still for a long moment. "What concerns you?" "I can't answer that in full," I said. "Not yet, but I can tell you that our concern is not about any specific species. It is about patterns, long-running patterns in how large institutions handle the things that are given to them." She was quiet again. The way her species held stillness was different from how humans did. She did not seem to be waiting. She seemed to be processing, deeply, the way a body of water processes a stone dropped into it, feeling the disturbance all the way to the bottom. Finally, she said something in the chord language of her species, a sequence of tones that the universal translator rendered haltingly. "We have not been asked to earn anything in a very long time," the translation offered. "I wonder if we have forgotten how." I sat with that. "That," I said carefully, "is exactly what I am afraid of. Not afraid, concerned." But in that moment, the distinction felt smaller than it usually did. We sat in the observation lounge for another hour and spoke about other things, and nothing we said had any official weight or policy consequence, and it was one of the most important conversations I had during the entire diplomatic process. Because Current went back to her delegation that night, and what happened next, she never officially attributed to our conversation, and I never asked her to. But I noticed. The arbitration panel convened 7 weeks after Vale filed her challenge. In that time, 4 more things happened that I need to describe precisely, because each of them mattered, and none of them were incidental. First, the Prime Minister survived the no-confidence motion. It was not close. 61% voted to continue. The motion had been brought by a coalition of trade and manufacturing groups who were feeling the economic friction of the pressure campaign, and their defeat was a signal that Earth's public, while not fully understanding the details of what was happening 6 light-years away, had developed an instinct that something important was being defended. My daughter sent me a message when the vote was announced. It said, 61%, Dad. I told my housemates you were the reason, and they are now mildly obsessed with you. I saved that message. Second, the parent maintenance period quietly ended 3 days after it began, without explanation or announcement. The relay stations reopened on a Thursday morning, and no one at the Federation said anything about it. I did not raise it either. I simply noted it. Something had shifted in the parent calculation, and I did not yet know what. Third, a journalist from a small independent publication that covered Federation affairs published a long piece examining the historical records of the Commons contribution process, specifically, the contribution histories of species who had joined in the past millennium. It was detailed and specific and cited records that were technically public but practically obscure. The piece traced the scientific output of 6 species over the centuries following their commons contributions. The trajectory was, in each case, the same. Input rose sharply at ratification, then it leveled, then it declined. None of the 6 species had produced a fundamental scientific breakthrough in their primary field of expertise in the 2 centuries following ratification. The piece circulated extensively in Federation academic and policy circles. Vale's office issued a statement dismissing it as unsourced and speculative. 3 Velthan research institutions cited it in papers published the following week. I had nothing to do with that journalist's work. I want to be clear about that. Nora Webb knew the journalist from a professional context and had spoken with her twice about general records access procedures. That is all. The research was the journalist's own. Fourth, Current formally requested, through official RETH diplomatic channels, that she be reassigned from the standard delegation seat to the position of RETH Senior Observer for the Human Diplomatic File. This was an internal RETH decision and did not require Federation Council approval. The request was granted within 24 hours, which, for a RETH internal approval process, was essentially instantaneous. It meant she could now speak to me on the record. She requested a meeting the day before the arbitration panel convened. This time it was an official meeting, logged and noted. She brought a junior aide. I brought Oliver. We sat at a table that was polished and reflective and too wide for comfortable conversation, which is exactly why official tables are that wide. The RETH delegation, Current said, is interested in understanding Earth's position more fully before the arbitration process concludes. Earth is glad to share its position, I said. There has been discussion within our delegation, she said carefully, about the journalist's piece regarding Commons contribution histories. I read it, I said. Our longest-serving academic delegation has requested access to the original records cited, she said. They are reviewing them. Several of our researchers have expressed concern about the pattern described. Oliver was very carefully not reacting. I had told him beforehand to keep his face neutral no matter what happened. He was doing well. I understand, I said. Earth has also reviewed those records. It was part of our decision-making process. Current was still. Why did you not raise this in the emergency session? Because if I had raised it in the emergency session, I said, it would have looked like an accusation. Earth did not wish to accuse the Federation of anything. We wished to protect ourselves from a pattern we had identified. There is a difference. You did not trust us to respond well to the information, she said. We did not yet know enough about you to predict how you would respond, I said. We still do not. Fully. That is honest. She was quiet for a long time. Her membranes shifted through 3 shades of gray I had not learned to read precisely. The arbitration panel, she said finally. The RETH hold 2 seats. I want you to know that we have not decided how to vote. I want you to know that we are genuinely considering. That is all anyone can ask, I said. After she left, Oliver sat back in his chair and let out a long, controlled breath. She's going to vote with us, he said. She's going to vote with what she believes is right, I said. Which may be the same thing. We should not assume it is certain. What do we need on the panel? We need the RETH seats plus at least 2 others, I said. The smaller species, the ones who joined in the last 5 centuries, and have felt the Commons contribution pattern themselves. Do they know they've felt it? That, I said, is what the next 48 hours are for. What followed was the most intensive 48 hours of my career. Not dramatic, not loud. It was quiet and careful, and it involved a lot of tea and a lot of listening. I met, formally and informally, with delegates from 11 smaller member species. I did not lobby them. I did not argue. I asked questions and then I listened to the answers. I asked each of them, when was the last time your species produced a fundamental breakthrough in the field for which you are best known? The answers were, without exception, uncomfortable. Not because the species had failed. Most of them had achieved a great deal within the Federation's cooperative framework. They had contributed to collective projects, shared in collective benefits, participated in collective decisions. They had built good lives for their people within a structure that was, genuinely, better than what existed before. But the answers were uncomfortable because every one of those delegates, when given permission to really think about the question, had to go back a long time before they found an answer. One delegate, from a species called the shell, who joined the Federation 800 years ago, sat quietly after I asked the question, and then said something I wrote in my private notes word for word. "We were known for our propulsion systems," she said. "When we joined, we contributed our greatest work. We were very proud. The commons amplified it, and other species built on it, and wonderful things came from that contribution. But we stopped." She paused. I had not thought about this clearly before now. We stopped because the problem was solved. Someone else would solve the next problem, or the commons would find a combination of what already existed. We had contributed. We had done our part. The habit of solving things ourselves. She stopped again. It faded. It just faded. The arbitration panel convened on a gray, recycled air morning that smelled like nothing, as always. Vale presented her case with absolute precision. It was a masterpiece of procedural argumentation. She was right about every technical detail. Her reading of the texts was accurate. Her citations were impeccable. When she finished, the chamber gave her the particular quality of silence reserved for something that has been done very well. Nora presented Earth's response. She was steady and clear. She made 3 arguments. First, that tradition is not statute. Second, that Article 44 requires good faith cooperation, but does not specify its content. And third, that Earth's refusal to contribute the fold drive was not a refusal of cooperation, but a refusal of one specific act, and that those were fundamentally different things. Then I was invited to make a closing statement. I looked at the panel. 5 members. The 2 Velthan in the center, the 2 Reth on the left, a shell representative on the right, who had been selected by lot and whom I had not spoken to during the previous 48 hours, and about whom I knew very little. I thought about Hartley. Stay clear. I spoke for 8 minutes. I said nothing about patterns or histories or scientific output trajectories. I said nothing about the 6 species. I kept all of that out of the room. I said one thing. Earth's decision was made by people who had thought carefully about what they were being asked to give, and why they were being asked, and what the long-term consequences for both Earth and the Federation might be. We did not refuse from stubbornness or arrogance. We refused from care, and we remained open to a different arrangement, structured differently, with terms that protected the things we believed needed protecting. We want to be here, I said. We want to contribute. We want to be part of what the Federation is building. We are asking for the right to contribute on terms that allow us to remain, over time, the kind of species that has things worth contributing. The panel retired to deliberate. It took 4 hours. I drank 3 cups of something hot and amber that a Reth aide brought me, which tasted like warm earth and felt, somehow, kind. Oliver sat beside me and we talked about other things. He told me about his sister's new job. I told him about Amara's course progression. We talked about a restaurant in Edinburgh that I had been missing for 6 months. When the panel returned, the senior Velthan member read the finding. The challenge was not upheld. The petition of cooperative obligation was found to derive its authority from tradition rather than statute, and tradition, while significant, did not carry the same binding legal force as a charter article. Earth's refusal was not a breach of Article 44. Earth remained in compliance with its membership obligations. Vale sat perfectly still when the finding was read. Then she did something I had not seen her do in 62 years of Federation records. She looked at the shell representative on the panel, and then she looked at the Reth delegates, and then she looked at me, and there was something in her expression that was not quite anger, and not quite admiration, and not quite anything her species had an established name for. I met her gaze and nodded, once, formally. She looked away. Outside the arbitration chamber, in the curved corridor with Sorrel Mahan visible through the viewport, Oliver stood next to me and said nothing for a full 30 seconds. Then he said, "Now what?" I had been thinking about that. The finding was a legal victory. Legal victories are not the same as real victories, and I had no intention of confusing them. The Federation was 3,000 years old, and it had resources and patience and institutional weight that Earth could not match in any direct contest. What had changed was not the power balance. What had changed was the question. Before today, the Federation had been asking, "Why won't you comply?" After today, The question was going to become, what do you actually want? And that question, I had been waiting to answer for a very long time. Now, I said, we make an offer. I wrote the mutual transparency framework in a single night. Not because I was that fast. I was working from a draft that Earth's policy team had been developing for 2 years, a document so thoroughly revised and reconsidered that it had gone through 47 versions before I received the final brief. What I did in that night was reduce it, shape it, and translate it from the language of policy into the language of people. Because the framework was going to have to reach people who had been operating inside a system for 3,000 years and had stopped noticing most of it, and documents that speak only to institutions do not reach people. The framework was this. Earth would not contribute the fold drive to the commons. That was unchanged and would remain unchanged. But Earth would open a staged, supervised program of access to selected research archives from the drive's development history, specifically the theoretical and material science work that underpinned the drive's core principles, work that was not itself weaponizable and did not by itself enable reproduction of the drive, but which represented decades of human scientific thinking at its deepest. In exchange, Earth requested reciprocal access, not to weapons systems, not to classified defense infrastructure, to the Federation's internal governance records, its voting histories going back 500 years, its closed session transcripts, and its conflict resolution archives covering every interspecies dispute that had been adjudicated in that period. In other words, you want to see how we think. Show us how you think first. I filed the framework 3 days after the arbitration finding. I filed it quietly, without a press statement, without a diplomatic ceremony, without anything that would require the Federation to respond publicly in real time, because public responses to surprises are almost always worse than considered private ones. The Federation's response period under charter procedure was 30 standard days. On day 4, I received a request for a private meeting from Grand Arbiter Soresh. I thought carefully about that request. Soresh was not a simple figure. In the 11 years I had been observing Federation politics, he had demonstrated a quality that I had come to think of as strategic patience, the ability to wait longer than anyone expected before making his move. Not because he was slow, but because he understood that the right moment was worth waiting for. He had been Grand Arbiter for 19 years. He had navigated 6 membership ratifications, 4 major interspecies disputes, and 1 near collapse of the trade framework that nobody outside senior diplomatic circles knew had come within a few weeks of breaking down entirely. He had never faced anything like this. I accepted the meeting. He came to the human diplomatic section, which was itself unusual. Grand Arbiters do not typically travel to member sections. It was a gesture, and I received it as one. He sat across from me, and he was direct, in the way that people who have been diplomatic for a very long time can afford to be, when they choose to set the diplomacy aside. Ambassador Adeyemi, he said, I want to understand something. Please ask, I said. The records you are requesting under the framework, he said, the governance archives, the conflict histories, what do you expect to find in them? It was a precise question, not defensive, genuinely curious. I expect to find the Federation as it actually is, I said, rather than as it presents itself. I have read your public histories. They are admirable. I want to read the decisions that didn't make the public histories, not to criticize them, to understand them, and the theoretical research you are offering in exchange, he said. It would not enable reproduction of the fold drive. No, I said, that was deliberate. You are offering us the principles but not the application. We are offering you the thinking, I said, not the result. Because the thinking is where the value is. The result is already built. It flies. It works. Anyone who receives the result and applies it has gained nothing except speed. The species that understands the thinking and develops their own result has gained everything. Soresh was quiet. His secondary membranes moved in the slow way that, I had learned, meant he was processing something that required more than his usual cognitive engagement. You are describing a pedagogy, he said finally, not a technology transfer. Yes, I said. You want to teach us, he said, and his translator, for just a moment, did something I had never heard it do. It added an inflection that had no clear human linguistic equivalent. something between surprised and moved. Not give us the answer, teach us to find it. We want to learn alongside you, I said. That is not the same as teaching. Earth has things to learn too. We always have. But yes, broadly, you have described it correctly. He looked at me for a long time. Ambassador, he said, I am going to ask you something I have not asked in 19 years of this position, because I have never had reason to. I am going to ask for your honest assessment of something that concerns me about the Federation. I waited. The journalist piece, he said. The pattern in the Commons contribution histories. I have asked the Senior Academic Council to verify the underlying data. They confirmed it this morning. He paused. The confirmation was not comfortable. I said nothing. 3,000 years, he said quietly. And in that time, 6 species who were at the edge of their fields upon ratification have not produced comparable work in the 2 centuries since. He looked at the table. I have been telling myself there are other explanations. Demographic shifts, redirected priorities, resource allocation choices, and some of that is true. But not all of it. He looked up. Not all of it. No, I said carefully, not all of it. The Commons was built to share knowledge, he said, not to collect it and let it settle. It was not designed to create dependency. But systems develop properties that their designers did not intend, particularly over long periods of time. Yes, I said. And you saw this from the outside, he said. You saw it in 11 years of provisional observation, which we gave you access to freely, because we expected you to be impressed by us. He did not say this with bitterness, but with a kind of precise, self-aware irony that I had not expected from him. And you were. We were, I said. There is a great deal to be impressed by. That is also true. But you were watching for other things simultaneously. We were watching for everything, I said. It is what humans do. We have a difficult relationship with trust, because we have been betrayed by our own institutions enough times to know that they require watching, even the good ones, perhaps especially the good ones. He sat with that. The mutual transparency framework, he said finally. I am not in a position to accept it unilaterally. It requires council deliberation. I know, I said. The governance archives go back 500 years. Some of what is in them will be uncomfortable for some member species. I understand, I said. Earth's own records contain a great deal that is uncomfortable for us. We have made them available to the Federation's academic delegations upon request. We did that quietly, 3 years before our ratification, as a gesture of good faith. I assume you know. He looked at me, and for the first time in all the months I had spent across negotiating tables from Federation officials, I saw something in his expression that was neither diplomatic nor procedural. It was simply human, or the closest thing his species had to it, the look of someone who has just understood that the other person in the room has been playing a longer game than they realized, and that the game is not hostile, and that they need to reconsider where they stand. You made your records available 3 years before your ratification, he said slowly. Without announcement, I said, without expectation of reciprocity. We wanted you to know who we were before you decided whether to admit us. It seemed honest. And you were waiting, he said, all this time, for us to demonstrate the same honesty. We were waiting to understand whether you were capable of it, I said. There is a difference. We did not assume you were not. We did not know. We needed to find out. The silence that followed was very long. I did not try to fill it. I will bring the framework to the council, Suresh said finally. He stood. He was very tall. I will advocate for it personally. I want you to understand that this is not something I do frequently. I understand, I said. Thank you. Do not thank me, he said. If I bring this to the council and it fails, it will complicate things significantly. I know, I said. You are comfortable with that risk. I am accustomed to it, I said. There is a difference there too. He left. Oliver, who had been sitting very still in the observer chair the entire time, waited until he heard the outer door close before he spoke. Did that just go the way I think it went? He said. I think so, I said. He's going to push for it. He is going to try, I said. The council is not him. But yes, he is going to try. Oliver was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your daughter is going to read about this in history class someday. She is going to be extremely embarrassed," I said. "Embarrassed? She will be embarrassed because I will insist on explaining it to her myself first, and I will take too long and use too many sentences, and she will make the face she makes when she is trying to be patient with me." Oliver laughed. It was the first time anyone on the team had laughed in what felt like weeks. It changed the room a little. It changed the air. The council voted 22 days later. 37 in favor. 4 against. The 4 against were the 4 eldest member species. Each of them had contributed their defining technology to the Commons within a decade of ratification. Each of them had been in the Federation for more than 1,500 years. None of them had produced a fundamental scientific breakthrough in their primary field in the past 8 centuries. I noted this without satisfaction, and without any kind of victory feeling, because what those numbers described was not failure. It was loss. Something had been lost, slowly and without intention, and it was not small. The framework passed. The records exchange began. Earth's research archive and the Federation's governance history began flowing in both directions, through carefully secured channels. And then the last thing happened, the thing I had not planned, the thing I had not known to plan for. 6 weeks after the vote, a young Shell researcher sent a paper to the Federation's Scientific Publication Board. She was 24 years old, in the first year of her doctorate. The paper described a theoretical approach to drive mechanics that she had developed independently, working from the principles in Earth's newly accessible research archive. Not copying, not replicating, starting from the same questions Earth's engineers had started from, and finding a different path. Her approach was not more efficient than the fold drive. It was less efficient in 3 out of 4 standard operational scenarios. It was more efficient in the 4th scenario by a factor of 37. Nobody had seen that scenario before, because nobody had approached the problem from that angle before, because nobody had needed to, because the answer had been provided, and the question had become unnecessary. The paper caused considerable excitement in Federation scientific circles. It also caused something else, quieter and harder to name, in the diplomatic and policy community. The Shell researcher was 24 years old, and she had been working on a problem that her species had stopped asking 800 years ago, and she had found something new. Her name was Della. I learned this from the paper's byline. I have thought about her often since. I wrote her a letter. It was not official correspondence. It was a personal letter, brief and sincere, in which I told her that her paper was the most important thing that had happened since Earth joined the Federation, not because of what it had found, but because of how it had been found. She wrote back. She said, "I did not know we had stopped asking. I only know that when I saw the questions in your archive, I felt something I could not explain, like I was recognizing something I had not known was missing. I sat with that letter for a long time. Recognizing something you had not known was missing. That was it. That was the whole thing. That was what we had been trying to protect and what we had been trying to give, and we had not quite known how to say it in the emergency session, or the arbitration chamber, or the diplomatic meetings, and a 24-year-old Shell researcher had said it better in one sentence than I had managed in months of carefully constructed arguments. I recorded my final personal log entry as senior ambassador that evening. I was stepping back to a consultative role. Patrick would take the position. He was ready. He had been ready for a year, and I had been staying partly because the work was not finished, and partly, I was honest enough to admit, because I did not quite know what I would do with myself when it was. The log entry was short, I said. The mutual transparency framework is operational. The research compact is open. 11 species have submitted applications to participate in the first joint study program, which will begin in 4 months. Earth's trade relations are fully normalized. Della's paper has 216 citations in the Federation's scientific literature in 6 weeks, which is apparently a record. I paused. Outside the viewport, Sorel Mahon was in full phase, the whole enormous disk visible, orange and patient and indifferent to everything. I said, "My daughter starts her postgraduate research in xenophysics in September. She is interested in propulsion theory. I told her that the field was going to be very interesting in the next several decades, possibly the most interesting it has ever been. She told me I say that about everything. She is not wrong." I said, Hartley wrote to me last week. She said she read the arbitration transcript and the council vote records and that she was glad. She also said, which is very like her, that this was only the beginning, and that I should not get comfortable. I paused again. I said, she is right. This was only the beginning. 37 species voted for an arrangement that requires them to be transparent about themselves to a civilization they have known for 11 years. That is an act of trust that I do not take lightly, and I do not think they should take lightly either, and the work ahead of us is the work of being worthy of it. I said, we did not give them our technology. We gave them something harder. We gave them the insistence that they could find their own. I hope, in time, they will understand what that was worth. I stopped the recording. I sat in the quiet office with the patient gas giant outside, and the photograph of Earth above the door, and the small, worn corner of Hartley's letter visible in the open drawer of my desk. Then I opened a channel to Cape Town and called my daughter. She answered on the second ring this time. Dad, she said, how did it go? It went, I said. That's not an answer. No, I said. It's not. I leaned back in my chair. Amara, when you start your research in September, what question are you going to work on? She was quiet for a moment, surprised by the question. Then she said, I want to understand why the fold drive works. Not how, why, what property of space allows it to function the way it does. Nobody's really asked that question properly yet. Everyone's been focused on the how. I smiled at the screen. Good, I said. Keep asking it. Do not let anyone give you the answer before you've found it yourself. Dad, that's a weird thing to say. I know, I said. I'll explain it properly when I'm home. When are you coming home? Soon, I said. And I meant it. The stars outside were the same stars they had always been, and the distance between Earth and this station was the same distance it had always been, and none of that was different. But something had changed in the galaxy that night, not the size of it, not the structure of it, only the mood of it perhaps. The sense, somewhere in the long conversation between species that has been going on for 3,000 years, that a new voice had arrived and said something unexpected, not louder, not stronger, just stubbornly, specifically, unmistakably itself. That was enough. That was, in the end, everything.